Hi gang, so today I'm going to show you 5 ways you can do a marble base. The UV resin is optional, you don't need it for all of them. It is quite nice, I find, and gives it that nice kind of smooth, shiny marble look that people like. So on most of these, we're just going to do a blob of it just to flatten the top of the base. You can do this with other things, you can use milliput, you can use green stuff, just to get rid of that bobbly surface. Just so it's a bit easier to paint on. If you find yourself a little bobby pin or something, or like a pin, you can just spread it out, and then you can spread it out and use that to also get out any air bubbles and to try and level it a bit. The UV resin is quite good because it does self-level to an extent, so you don't have to do too much work to get a super smooth, flat surface, which is why I enjoy using it. If you don't want to use it, there are other things to make a smooth top for your base, like I said, milliput, green stuff. I would probably use liquid green stuff instead, just because it's slightly more easier to work with than green stuff. I'm not the biggest fan of actual green stuff, I do use milliput instead most of the time. So once you're happy with how smooth it's looking, you can just go ahead and set it. Make sure that you do set it for the minimum time. I think it's like 3 minutes for this one. I didn't set this one quite as much. I did tap it with my little stick and it felt solid, but it was still a bit sticky. I should have probably set it for a little longer. So for marble version 1, we're going to need some paint and some water. The UV resin in this is optional. So we're going to start with a base paint. I'm just using Corax white, just to get that classic white marble. I'm just gonna cover the resin that we did with it. You probably should prime. You use a rattle can primer or an airbrush or brush on primer, because I did have to do a few layers of this just to get it completely covered, because it kept kind of wiping off the resin a bit. That's just me being lazy. You should prime it. You can also see it's making little cracks on one side. That's just because the resin wasn't fully set. That's my bad as well. So for the actual marble, you're going to want some watered down paint. I'm going with Abaddon black. So you want to water the paint down, and then when you're putting it on the mini, you want to make a stripe and then add water and try and thin that line and make it super, super thin. But you can also have this nice sort of grey fade on one side from doing this, which looks quite nice. So you can make that line as thin as you want, spread out the fade as much as you want, or get rid of it with just more water. And then just keep adding lines where you want them, where kind of looks good. So on this one I put the water down first, just to show you that you can do it that way if you are struggling to get the paint to stay wet enough to move it around after putting it on the mini. So you can use either a reference or just go by eye and see what looks good. I tend to just do it by eye and how I feel. I sort of treat it as painting a landscape kind of thing. So you want to just do layers of essentially rocky mountain outlines. So you can make them as thick as you want, you can make them as thin as you want, you can put them wherever you want. With marble, the veins do all tend to run the same direction and then like converge on each other and whatever, but you can do whatever you want. If you do it wrong or you don't like where a line has been, you can also go in with your base paint again, in this case Corax white, and just clean up where you don't want that line to be, or thin it from the other side. So if you haven't quite gotten the line as thin as you want from the water on the other side, you can thin it from the other side again with the base paint. So again, you just want to do a little watery river, and then with a wet brush, just go down, scraping that paint along, just moving it to where you want it to be, leaving a nice little trail. Please don't count how many times I licked my brush this time. Thanks. So you don't have to do any of these tutorials with the colors I've used. You can literally use any color you want, make some black marble with green stripes, make some white marble with gold stripes, with pink stripes, whatever you want. It's completely up to you. I'm just gonna stick with black and white, and I do add in a bit of gold on a later one just to show you that you can add like other colors. You don't have to just use layer paint, you don't have to just use base paint, you can use inks, you can use metallics, you can use pretty much anything as long as you have enough water to spread the paint along the line that you want. Most of these are the same kind of technique of using super watered down paint or ink and then just using water to thin out those darkest lines to get the shapes that you want. So just carry on making your little lines, trying to get those lines as thin as you can, unless you don't want thin lines, in which case don't do thin lines. I find for marble, the thinner the lines, the more real it looks, but for whichever style you're going for, if you want a more cartoony style, then maybe thicker lines might work quite nice. I like leaving the blended gradient, the wet patch with the black remnants. I like to leave that just because I think it adds a little more depth to the rocks. If you're struggling getting the lines thin enough from the black side, you can always get your base color, like I said before, and just have a go doing the same technique, but from the other side with the base color, just to cover up some of the black. I find that marble bases are quite good if you have an issue with like shaky hands or something, because the lines, they don't really want to be super straight and like curvy and smooth. You do want them to have like little bumps and lumps to make it look more like natural rock formation. So I feel like this is quite a good base for that. And it looks good. It's easy to make it look good. It's easy to mess up, but it's easy to make it look good. If I had to do lots of these, I probably wouldn't do as many lines. If I was like doing a big batch of them. I just wanted to give you as many chances as possible to see me doing basically the same thing over and over again without having to like rewind and go forwards and whatever. So one of the things you can do to make it a bit more interesting is using a secondary color, such as this Thunderhawk blue. So I'm just gonna put it down super gentle next to the black line and just fade it out the same way as I was doing with the black, just to give it a little extra tint. I think this looks quite nice. It makes it slightly more interesting, and you can use it as a way to contrast against the mini on top of it. So if you have a blue mini, then you could add yellow or orange to the base. If you have a purple mini, you could add some green. If you had a green mini, you could add some purple. That kind of thing, just to give it that extra little complement to the mini itself. And then I tend to like grabbing some white paint and just cleaning up in the middle between the black lines, giving some little highlight to the area. You can also, something that's quite nice to do is also putting the white essentially where I put the blue, just to give that extra super high contrast against the black. Doing this, blending it out. Easy peasy. As long as you keep everything wet, you shouldn't really have too much trouble. Don't be afraid of kind of flooding it a little bit with water. You can always mop it up with a dry brush. You can always take water off. You can always add water. And because it is so wet, the layers of paint are very thin. So if you do it wrong and you need to redo something, you can just go over it and it'll be fine. So here I'm just using the white, like I said before, doing the kind of opposite as I did with the black, just to create a giant contrast between the bright and the dark. Like with the blue, this just gives it some more depth, makes it a bit more interesting. So your kind of options are either doing this with white or doing it with a color, like I did with the blue. And if you do it with a color, I do suggest doing how I did before with the white in the center of the black lines rather than to the edges where the color is. Just so you still get that contrast, it's just a bit more spread out. I think keeping it just black and white looks more classical marble, more refined in a way. But adding the color just makes it look a bit more raw, look a bit more... This was not the best marble they could find, but it was all that they had kind of thing. So I did go over the blue with the white, but I did thin out the white a bit so you could still see the blue sort of through it, but so it wasn't quite as saturated. You don't have to do this. A lot of doing bases is just doing what you want to do, seeing what looks good. If it doesn't look good to you, then just try something else. There isn't really a, you need to do this, and you need to do this, and you need to do this. It's very much like, oh, I want to put this here. I want to put this over here. Oh, that looks kind of weird actually, so I'm going to move this. I'm going to put this there instead. Oh yeah, that looks quite good. It's all about playing around. There isn't really a set way of doing anything. These methods of doing marble are just how I find it easiest to do. This is the most successful, I think. This is my favorite way of doing it. It just takes a while because you have to use a lot of water and thin paint to move it around and get what you want. The UV resin is optional. I think it looks quite nice with it. It gives it that nice, shiny, glossy kind of protection over the top. I just think it looks really nice. I think it just adds another layer to it. But you don't have to. You could just leave it flat as well. Just stick your model on top. So now I'm just adding the resin, kind of trusting the surface tension around the edges and just pulling it around, spreading it out. I tried to make quite a thin layer, but then I did put some extra on top just to thicken it a bit. Be careful when you're doing this and spreading it around that you don't accidentally scrape the paint off. If you primed it, like I didn't, it shouldn't just scrape off, but I didn't prime this, so I was kind of like, oh, if I scrape the paint, it might come off the resin underneath it, so I put some extra resin on top. And then let it set under the torch, and then this is good to go. So the second type of marble we're going to do is essentially the opposite of the one we've just done. So we're going to do the resin to flatten the top like we did at the start, and then we're going to draw the marble lines on top. So I left the under bit of the resin black. I didn't paint it, so I'm going to use the white instead, kind of like an inverse of what we did at the start, and we're just going to go in and do the stripes. So because it's on resin, you will find that it will dry quite fast. I don't know why it does this. I don't know if resin sucks out the moisture faster or whatever. And the water will kind of make it kind of a bit cloudy along the edge, a bit bubbly, but it will leave those nice trails. In terms of difficulty, this one is easier because you can essentially just use a single paint to get this, because the black from underneath is already super dark and you're not really blending anything into it. And because of how the paint, this is very watered down paint by the way, how the paint works on top of the resin makes it so that it's a lot easier to get the variation in thickness on the lines, because it's going to puddle up and make little pools that you can then drag across to create the lines that you want. See how it's so much faster? Because I'm not having to spend so much time blending along the edge. And it still looks pretty good. You do have to be careful with this one because it is on top of the resin. The paint doesn't really want to stick to it. So either varnish over the top, do another layer of resin, just so it doesn't get rubbed off by accident. It's essentially like drawing in felt tip on a shiny piece of paper. The felt tip's just gonna wipe off if you're not careful. So the paint is dry, it's dry paint, but you can still, like, with a bit of effort, you can scrape it off. So if you do this wrong, because you can't go over it with the base color because the base color is see-through, just lick your finger and scrub it off. You'll be fine. Again, you can do this with any colors you want. I've just tried to keep it kind of simple, keeping it black, keeping it white, so you can see the lines because of that immense contrast between black and white. And like before, we're just trying to keep all the veins in the rock running the same direction like you would see in natural marble. And that's it. That's the whole process for this technique of doing marble. Marble number 3 is more of a... I kind of just did this for fun, just to see what it would look like. I've never tried this before, so I thought, you know, let's have a go. If you're struggling with making lines, then I thought it might be quite easy, maybe, to essentially make 3D marble. So you want to make some milliput. I wouldn't use green stuff for this. I would use milliput, maybe liquid green stuff if you can like get a thickish layer down. And you want to just spread it like kind of we did with the resin. And you want to smooth it out around the base and just create yourself a little platform that you can then sculpt into. So I'm going to take this wire and I'm just going to kind of cut it into lengths. You probably only need like 1 or 2 pieces. And then I bent it into the shape that I kind of thought a vein might look like. And I just started pressing it down into the milliput. It was quite difficult because some of them bent, not completely like, so they would lie straight. So I did resort to using a bit of wire to kind of draw the lines in. But this will essentially create a surface that you can prime and then use a contrast or a shade or ink to fill the recesses and create those lines in an easier way that doesn't involve actually physically drawing lines on. So if you are having trouble with the previous 2, then I do recommend having a go at this one. It's a little more fun as well. It's a little artsy crafty, bit art attack. It's just a little fun little thing I thought I'd try. When you are making the lines, just make sure that you're not creating any super big ridges or like bobbles of milliput that might get in the way when you dry brush later. So you can either leave it like this and just have the lines as they are and just work like that, which would look good, I think. Just fill the prime it white, fill the recesses with the Necron glowing technical paint, and then do a dark dry brush. That would look quite nice, create a nice sort of glowing cracked floor. Or you can go in like I have with my scalpel, and I've just recessed even more one side of the lines. So I'm just kind of pressing it down, creating this kind of dip, a kind of slant, just so there's a little more texture, so when I do come to dry brush it, I do get those extra little lumps and bumps, which could look quite nice, especially with a bit of highlight. So you can do this as much as you want, you can make it as textured as you want, you can make it as liney as you want. Again, it's your base. You can make it as complicated or as simple as you want it to be. So after you're done, you've let the milliput set overnight, you can prime it. I've primed it white, and now I'm just going to go in with a brush and with some gold ink and just go through all the lines. So this will work with any metallic paint if you wanted to use a metallic paint for this and have some gold stripes. You can use Retributor armor, you can use whichever one you want. I am a great purveyor of Dr. P.H. Martin's Iridescent Copperplate Gold ink. It is the nicest gold ink. This is not sponsored in any way, but this is the nicest gold ink that you will find. It has super small fleck, and it's just really nice to use. So just go through, fill all your lines however you want, and then we'll move on to the dry brushing. So I'm just gonna grab the closest other color to gold or white on my desk, which was the Thunderhawk blue that we used previously. You can use whatever color. Again, it's completely up to you. And you just want to do a very thorough dry brush over the top because of all the texture we created. You want to just make sure you get all of it to the value of color that you want it to be. I am gonna link the affiliate link and with the discount code to these dry brushes that I'm using in the description below. I do really like these brushes. We use them in the dry brush tutorial. I really like them. So after you've done the dry brush, I'm gonna get some white and just go in on those sloped sides that I made with the scalpel, and I'm just gonna highlight them just on the one side. This is gonna play against the dry brush in quite a nice way, and it'll clean up the metallic in the recesses if you've done a bit too much in some places, or you've decided that you don't want it to be so saturated in the gap. I'm just gonna work my way around. After I did the gold, I did go and paint all of the primed white surface with Corax white. That's why it kind of looks a bit grey. If I didn't do that, then this white would do nothing because the primer was this white. So just if you're wondering why it suddenly turned a little bit grey, you do want to paint over the primer either first or after you do the recesses. If you do it after the recesses, then you can take that to like clean up a little bit if you've gone over or like made a little mess. I did it after purely because I forgot to do it before I painted in the recesses. So you can see here that the white highlight on top of the Corax is quite minimal. It's not particularly noticeable, but it's there. It gives that little bit of extra shadow to the dry brush. I probably could have dry brushed a bit more, but I didn't want to go too overboard with it. I did want to keep it kind of subtle. So again, you can do this with contrast, you can do this with shade. It'll probably be a lot faster if you do that, just because then all the recesses will fill themselves and all the highest parts will not fill themselves. And then you could do a white dry brush over the top to get those high points, instead of how I've done it with the dark bits on the high points. So after you're done with that, we're just gonna seal it essentially with the resin. So this is kind of the only one where I would say that you need the resin to do this, just because we've made such an uneven floor with the milliput. Putting a resin kind of dome on top just makes it that extra flat, so you don't have to worry about your mini and where their feet are like gonna be at different heights because the milliput is all wibbly wobbly. So the resin does really help on this. I would recommend getting some. I find that UV resin is super helpful in a lot of scenarios. I do tend to use it a lot, especially in my kit bashes and my dioramas. It's very useful, it's very easy to work with. It's just one little bottle of UV resin and a blue torch. And you can create things like drips and blood splatters and water, all sorts. And then this is your final base. So with marble number 4, I primed this white just so we'd have a nice base. And then I'm gonna go in with the resin. And this is more of a sort of abstract marble. You can make it as liney and uniform as you like, or you can make it super, super abstract, like this one ends up. It just depends how you feel, and if it goes well. If you mess it up, then you can essentially get wherever you want with this. So after you've created your resin platform, get the air bubbles out, you're going to take some colors such as gold, white, black, blue, and you're just going to use a pin to make streaks in the resin. And the resin will kind of grip onto the paint and hold it. It is a little fiddly, so if you want to move a line after it's been in the resin, it does tend to pull the entire string of paint with it. So it's very easy to kind of lose what you've done because you've moved a bit by accident and it's got stuck on the needle or in the resin and it's gone somewhere you don't want it to be. It can be quite difficult to save it from that point. So you should probably just like get rid of the resin and start again if you absolutely hate it. So here I'm just adding gold. I'm just sort of doing stripes, little wiggly bits, trying to keep it kind of nice. And now I'm just adding some black just to cut up the gold a bit, create some more lines, create some more shapes. So you can either keep doing this and essentially fill in all the gaps with lines, and I think that looks quite nice. I think it looks quite cool. Or you can do what I did, put a load of colors and lines and stuff in it, and then get your pin and just swirl it all around and get all those lines to kind of mix up and break up and create this kind of cool abstract-y pattern. So here you can see what I mean by if you do push the lines, it does tend to take a lot of the paint with it. It doesn't really swirl in a swirly way. It kind of breaks it all up and creates these like little splatterings. So I'm just trying to arrange them in a way that I think looks kind of nice. And then I'm gonna go in with the white, the Corax white, and then I added the bold titanium white as well. Again, you can use ink for this, you can use paint for this, you can use essentially whatever you want. I wouldn't use anything too thin that you couldn't pick up with a pin. You don't want to get resin on a brush, it will kill your brush. So just to do two birds, one stone, I did some Necrons previously, and I gave them a sort of galaxy-esque universe base. So I primed the base black, I put a layer of resin on like I did with this, and I just swirled in some bright greens and a bright purple and a bright blue and a bit of pink splishes everywhere. And I kind of swirled them together, and I just made this really nice kind of galaxy effect in the base. It worked really well, it was very pretty. So then you just want to set it, and then that's your fourth base done. So with marble number 5, this is the same as marble 1, but I've added in some green and some gold, and we're doing it on some stairs. So these are my stairs. They're a bit rudimentary. I just kind of quickly glued some cork together and I tried to level it out by covering it in resin. You don't need to. Use whatever base you have. This was supposed to just be an example of how to do marble in 3D on a mini. So to start off with, I'm just gonna prime it. I didn't prime it. I'm just gonna paint it with the base paint. And then I'm gonna go in with the gold. This is my ink. So, kind of unlike the first one, I am gonna draw on the lines themselves, and I'm not going to blend them out like I did. So, this is kind of like hardcore level of marble, where you need to draw the lines yourself with a little brush and keep them kind of neat and where you want them to be. So if you cut a piece of marble, it'll have the vein running at whatever angle it is, and as you cut down, like making a 90-degree bend in the stairs, that vein will be pretty much perpendicular and just run in a straight line down that cut. And then when it flattens out again, it'll keep going along that diagonal, like you can see on my line over the stairs in the middle. I just did a few gold lines just to get some nice metallic in there. And don't forget to go down the back as well with your lines. One of the pros of using an ink like this one is that even if it looks like I'm putting it on quite thick, it's essentially just alcohol with glitter in it. So even if it looks like I'm kind of slopping it on, it's gonna dry pretty flat, so I'm not really worried about any extra texture. If you weren't going to UV over it, if you're gonna UV over it, obviously the texture of the paint doesn't matter because it'll be covered by the resin. But if you're not going to resin it afterwards, then I would be more wary of creating texture with your brush strokes and thin down your paint or ink a little bit more. So now I'm just going in with a second color. I'm just using a brown because I thought it would look quite nice with the gold. I'm using an even smaller brush and just doing some little tiny lines to kind of connect the gold bits together. And again, remembering to go down the back of the mini. It's quite nice, this brown with the gold, because it kind of looks similar. It kind of looks as though the brown is just where the gold hasn't quite peeked through. Just that like pre-rock before the gold. If you do want to know what paints I am using specifically for this, I have written them in the description. The reason I haven't really kind of declared it so much on the video is because, like, I don't want you to feel like you can only do this with these colors. You can do this with any colors you want. So to just add a bit of color, I picked a nice saturated contrast paint, and I'm just going down the right side of all of the veins, just adding that little hint of color. It is very bright, it is gonna look kind of funny, but we are going to trust the process on this one and go over it with the base color that I used, but watered down. So you still get some of that green coming through, but it's more subtle. It's more just peeking through rather than in your face green. And it kind of starts looking like icing on a cake when you get like marbled icing. So here you can see I'm starting to go over it with the base paint again. It's not completely destroying the green, it's just toning it down a bit so it's not as bright, and I am kind of fading the edges a little bit as well. So now this is where it's kind of more similar to marble number 1. We're gonna get that black, water it down. It doesn't have to be black, but I'm getting the black and I'm watering it down a lot, and I'm just gonna go along the opposite side to what I did the green on and just do that feathering with the blending on the black, just so we get that contrast. Keyword contrast. Just going all the way around, just against the green. It also helps split up the white a bit more. The white is very bright, so I just wanted to sort of tone it down a bit and give it a bit of texture. So once you're done and you're happy with how it looks, if you want to put resin on it like I am doing, it gives it a really nice gloss. If you just want to put gloss varnish on it, that works too. I just like that the resin gives it a kind of extra depth, kind of like when you put a glass or a fish tank over an image and it kind of distorts it a little bit. It doesn't do it much, obviously, it's a very thin layer of resin, but it does give that kind of magnify effect a little bit, and it helps the colors look a lot more saturated, like when you do varnish things. So I'm just using this stick to spread the resin around, all over, down the sides, around the back, just making a solid case of resin around these stairs. I could have just done it on the top and on the front, probably would have saved me a bit of time in the curing process. But that's future me's problem that past me should have thought of. So there you have it, that's what it looks like. This is all 5 bases, and I hope you try at least one of them out, see which one you like, maybe try all of them out, see which one is your preferred method, which one is easier for you, what you're having difficulties with. As usual, I do invite you to practice on paper before you do it on a mini, because for bases, marble is pretty flat. So it's pretty easy to practice it on paper because paper is also pretty flat. So once you're comfortable with doing it on paper, go ahead and do it on a mini. You'll be great. I believe in you. But as always, thanks for watching. Leave a like if this helped. Leave a comment if you want to see me do anything else. And I'll see you next week.